The bright lights of the command bridge flickered as the massive message came through the deep space communication array. Admiral Jake Morrison stood near the central control station, watching the star maps when Captain Lisa Harper called out from her position at the communications desk. Her voice carried a strange mix of confusion and disbelief that made everyone on the bridge turn their attention toward her workstation. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian Empire," Lisa said while adjusting the translation protocols on her equipment. The alien language came through as a series of harsh clicks and growls that the computer systems worked to convert into understandable human speech. "It's coming through on all official diplomatic channels, and they're demanding immediate response from our highest military command." Jake walked over to Lisa's station where the holographic display was already forming the image of a tall reptilian creature, dressed in elaborate ceremonial armor. The Zephyrian ambassador stood in what appeared to be a grand throne room, filled with other alien officials, all of whom looked extremely serious and formal. The ambassador's scales were a deep emerald color, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire that suggested barely contained anger. "People of Terra and all human colonies throughout this sector of space," the ambassador began in a voice that the translation system rendered as cold and threatening. "I am Ambassador Kreltar of the Zephyrian Empire, speaking on behalf of Supreme War Commander Vex Thule and the High Council of Military Affairs. For 3,000 of your Earth years, our two species have maintained a sacred truce that has kept peace between our peoples." The bridge crew gathered around as the message continued. Ryan Bell left his tactical station to get a better view, while Dr. Amy Foster moved closer from her science advisory position. The alien's words carried weight and ceremony that suggested this was no ordinary diplomatic communication. "However, your species has violated the ancient agreements that bound us to this peace," Ambassador Kreltar declared while gesturing dramatically toward what appeared to be a collection of official documents floating in the air beside him. "You have expanded your colonies beyond the borders established in the original treaty. Your technology has advanced to levels that threaten the careful balance of power we have maintained. Your cultural influence spreads to neutral worlds that were meant to remain free of outside interference." Lisa adjusted the audio systems as the ambassador's voice grew louder and more demanding. The translation software struggled briefly with some of the more complex alien phrases, but managed to keep the meaning clear. Around the bridge, the human crew members began exchanging glances that suggested they found something unusual about the aliens' accusations. "Therefore," the ambassador continued with obvious satisfaction, "the High Council has voted unanimously to declare the 3,000-year truce null and void. We hereby formally declare war upon humanity and all human settlements. You have exactly 72 standard hours to surrender your military forces, abandon your disputed colonies, and submit to Zephyrian authority. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your species." The message ended with the ambassador making some sort of ritual gesture that clearly meant the communication was finished. The holographic display faded away, leaving the bridge in relative silence as the crew processed what they had just heard. Lisa looked up from her equipment with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I think they just declared war on us." For several seconds, Jake stood perfectly still, staring at the empty space where the alien hologram had been. His face showed no expression, and his body language gave no hint of his thoughts. Ryan stepped forward as if to speak, but stopped when he noticed that the Admiral's shoulders had started shaking slightly. Then Jake Morrison began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, deep in his chest, but quickly grew into full, hearty laughter that echoed throughout the bridge. The sound was so unexpected and so completely out of place given the serious nature of the alien declaration that everyone else just stared at him in shock. Jake doubled over slightly, holding his stomach as the laughter continued to pour out of him. "Admiral," Dr. Amy Foster said carefully, "are you all right?" Jake straightened up and wiped tears from his eyes while still chuckling. He looked around at his confused crew members and tried to compose himself, but another wave of laughter overtook him. When he finally managed to control himself enough to speak, his voice still carried traces of amusement. "Did you hear that?" he asked while gesturing toward the communication station. "They want us to surrender in 72 hours or they'll destroy our species." This statement caused him to start laughing again, though not quite as intensely as before. "Sir," Ryan said with obvious concern, "shouldn't we be contacting Fleet Command about this threat?" Jake walked over to the main viewing screen that showed the vast expanse of space surrounding their ship. Distant stars twinkled peacefully in the darkness, while nearby patrol vessels continued their routine missions. Everything looked exactly as it had before the alien message arrived, calm and orderly and completely unthreatening. "Ryan," Jake said while turning back to face his tactical officer, "how long have humans and Zephyrians had this truce?" 3,000 years, sir, just like the ambassador said. "And in those 3,000 years, what do you think humanity has been doing?" Ryan considered the question for a moment before answering. "Advancing, sir. Exploring, developing new technology, expanding our colonies, improving our military capabilities." "Exactly," Jake said with a grin spreading across his face. 3,000 years of human advancement while these reptiles apparently sat around thinking that old treaty still meant something. He walked back toward Lisa's communication station. "Send a message to all department heads. I want them to see that alien declaration. I think they'll find it as amusing as I do." Lisa hesitated before responding. "Sir, should I also contact Earth Command and let them know about the war declaration?" "Oh, absolutely," Jake replied while still smiling. "But tell them there's no rush. Something tells me this is going to be the shortest war in galactic history." As word of the Zephyrian declaration spread throughout the ship, similar laughter could be heard echoing from various sections. The crew seemed to share their admiral's amusement at the alien ultimatum. In the engineering sections, technicians paused their work to chuckle at the news. In the medical bay, doctors and nurses shook, their heads in disbelief at the aliens' apparent ignorance of current human capabilities. The UTS Defender continued on its patrol route while its crew prepared to witness what would likely be a very educational experience for their new enemies. Supreme War Commander Vexthul stood in the center of his command chamber on the Zephyrian homeworld, his scaled hands gripping the edge of the tactical display table. The holographic star map showed human colonies scattered across dozens of systems, each one marked with estimated military strength, based on intelligence reports that were now 3,000 years old. His advisors surrounded him in a circle, their reptilian faces showing confusion and growing concern. "Explain this to me again," Vexthul demanded while his tail twitched with agitation behind him. "Our spies report that humans across the galaxy are laughing at our declaration of war." "Laughing? How does a species react to imminent destruction with amusement?" Intelligence Chief Mordek stepped forward holding a data pad filled with surveillance reports. His smaller frame and darker scales marked him as a member of the scholar caste rather than the warrior class. "Supreme Commander, our operatives on 17 different human worlds report similar behavior. Instead of panic or desperate military preparations, the humans appear to be treating our ultimatum as some form of entertainment." Sub-Commander Kretak, a female Zephyrian with battle scars across her neck scales, moved closer to the display table. Her voice carried the harsh tone of someone who had spent decades in military service. "Perhaps this is some form of psychological warfare. The humans might be trying to appear fearless to intimidate us or confuse our intelligence-gathering efforts." Vexthul considered this possibility while studying the star map. The human colonies looked exactly as they had during the original treaty negotiations 3 millennia ago. Small settlements scattered across resource-rich worlds. The intelligence report suggested minimal military presence and outdated defensive systems that should pose no serious threat to Zephyrian battle fleets. Meanwhile, on the distant world of Earth, President Danny Crawford stood before the Global Assembly in the Great Hall, where representatives from every human nation and colony gathered for important decisions. The massive chamber buzzed with quiet conversations as delegates discussed the alien ultimatum that had arrived just hours earlier. Danny raised his hand for silence and the room quickly became still. "My fellow humans," Danny began with a calm voice that carried clearly through the assembly hall, "we have received what can only be described as a rather outdated threat from our old friends, the Zephyrians. It seems they believe that 3,000 years of peace has left humanity weak and vulnerable." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the assembled delegates. Dr. Helen Price, Earth's leading expert on alien species and cultures, stood up from her seat in the scientific advisory section. Her gray hair and lined face showed the wisdom of someone who had spent decades studying galactic politics and interspecies relations. "Mr. President," Dr. Price said while addressing both the leader and the assembly, "I believe the Zephyrians have made a fundamental error in understanding human development. Their species values tradition and stability above all else. They likely assume that we have remained essentially unchanged during the treaty period, just as they have. Danny nodded toward Dr. Price before addressing the assembly again. Dr. Price raises an excellent point. While the Zephyrians spent 3,000 years maintaining their existing culture and technology, humanity has been doing what humans do best. We adapted, we grew, we learned, and we advanced beyond anything these aliens can imagine. Far from Earth, on the frontier colony of New Montana, the local population was having an entirely different kind of reaction to the war declaration. Pete Johnson, a cattle rancher whose family had been working the same land for 6 generations, sat on his front porch reading the official government message on his personal communication device. His neighbor, Kate Williams, who served as the elected mayor of their small settlement, walked up the dirt path leading to his house. "Pete," Kate called out while waving a similar device in her hand. "Did you see this thing from the lizard people?" Pete looked up from his reading with a broad smile crossing his weathered face. "Sure did, Kate. Funniest thing I've read all year. They want us to surrender in 72 hours or they're going to destroy all of humanity." Kate laughed while settling into the empty chair beside Pete on his porch. "My communication officer says there's betting pools starting up all over the colony. People are taking wagers on how long this so-called invasion is going to last." "What kind of odds are they giving?" Pete asked with genuine curiosity. "Most folks figure it'll be over in less than a day once these aliens actually try to attack something," Kate replied while scrolling through messages on her device. "Some of the younger folks are saying we should make it last longer just to give everyone a good show." Back on the Zephyrian homeworld, Vex Thul was receiving increasingly disturbing reports from his intelligence network. His advisors presented data showing that human military installations throughout the galaxy seemed almost completely unconcerned about the impending war. Patrol schedules remained unchanged, defensive systems stayed at routine readiness levels, and military personnel continued their normal duties without any sign of emergency preparations. "This makes no sense," Vex Thul muttered, while pacing around the tactical display. "Either these humans are completely insane, or they know something that we do not understand." Technology Assessor Yulvarn, the youngest member of the command staff, stepped forward hesitantly. His pale green scales and nervous manner marked him as someone more comfortable with computers and analysis than with military strategy. "Supreme Commander, there is another possibility we should consider." "Speak," Vex Thul commanded while stopping his pacing to face the young assessor. "What if the humans are not afraid because they genuinely have no reason to be afraid?" Yulvarn suggested carefully. "Our intelligence about human capabilities is based on observations made at the beginning of the treaty period. We have had very little direct contact with human military forces for 3,000 years. Mordek shook his head dismissively. "Impossible. No species can advance that dramatically in such a short time period. 3,000 years is barely enough time for significant cultural development, let alone major technological breakthroughs. Unless," Yulvarn continued despite the obvious skepticism from his colleagues, "we are dealing with a species that develops much more rapidly than our own people do." Vex Thul considered this troubling possibility while staring at the star map. The human colonies looked small and defenseless, but appearances could be deceiving. The laughter of the human population suggested either complete madness or complete confidence. Given humanity's reputation for survival and adaptation, madness seemed unlikely. "Double our intelligence efforts," Vex Thul finally ordered. "I want detailed reports on current human military capabilities, not historical data from the treaty period. If these humans think they can laugh at the might of the Zephyrian Empire, they are about to learn a very painful lesson." But even as he gave these orders, a small part of Vex Thul's mind wondered if perhaps the painful lesson might be intended for someone else entirely. The Zephyrian battle fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Haven's Gate system, with the precision of a military force that had trained for this moment for decades. 200 warships arranged themselves in perfect attack formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had conquered 17 different alien species over the past millennium. War Captain Zormith stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays show their target growing larger as they approached. Haven's Gate looked exactly like the intelligence reports had described. A small mining and trading outpost built around a single space station orbiting a resource-rich asteroid field. The human installation appeared to be nothing more than a collection of connected modules and docking bays designed for civilian use rather than military defense. A few small patrol craft moved lazily between the asteroids, their pilots apparently unaware that death was approaching from the darkness of space. "Target analysis complete," announced Tactical Officer Hessica from his position at the weapons control station. His claws moved efficiently over the alien controls as data flowed across multiple screens. "The human station shows minimal defensive capabilities. We count only 12 small patrol vessels and no heavy weapons installations. This should be a simple demonstration of Zephyrian military superiority." Zormith nodded with satisfaction while studying the tactical display. The human outpost looked so peaceful and defenseless that he almost felt sorry for the beings who were about to die. Almost, but not quite, because this was war and the humans had brought this destruction upon themselves by violating the ancient treaty. Station. Commander Chris Baker sat in his office, reviewing the morning reports when his communication system announced an incoming priority message. The middle-aged human looked tired from years of managing a busy mining operation, but his eyes showed the sharp intelligence of someone who had survived decades on the frontier. His assistant knocked on the door before entering with a concerned expression. "Commander," the young woman said while holding a datapad, "we're getting some unusual readings from our long-range sensors. It looks like a large fleet of ships just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of our system." Chris leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. "How large is large, Janet?" "About 200 ships, sir. They're maintaining attack formation and heading straight for us." "Ah," Chris said with obvious amusement. "Our Zephyrian friends have finally arrived. Send word to all station personnel that we're about to have some visitors. Tell Lieutenant Sam Torres and the patrol crews to get ready for a little demonstration." In the patrol craft squadron's ready room, Lieutenant Sam Torres was briefing his pilots when the alert came through. The young officer had been flying patrol missions around Haven's Gate for 3 years, but this would be his first actual combat situation. His fellow pilots, including Commander Alex Reed and several other experienced space jockeys, gathered around as Sam explained the situation. "Okay, people," Sam said while activating the holographic display showing the approaching alien fleet. "We've got 200 Zephyrian warships coming our way. They probably think they're about to attack a helpless mining station defended by a few outdated patrol boats." Alex Reed chuckled while checking his flight suit. "Should we tell them the truth or let them figure it out the hard way?" "I think," Sam replied with a grin, "we should let them figure it out themselves. It'll be more educational that way." Back on the station, Dr. Nina Walsh made her way to the industrial section where the mining equipment was housed. The physicist had been looking forward to this day ever since the war declaration had arrived. Her colleagues often joked that she enjoyed her work a little too much, but Nina genuinely loved the elegance of converting matter into energy at the molecular level. The Zephyrian fleet moved closer to Haven's Gate while War Captain Zormith prepared to demonstrate the price of defying the Empire. His ships spread out into attack positions that would allow them to destroy the human station quickly and efficiently. The patrol craft that had been moving through the asteroid field seemed to be fleeing toward the safety of the station, exactly as Zormith had expected. "Begin the attack," Zormith commanded while settling back into his command chair. "Target the station's power systems first. I want these humans to watch their defenses fail before we destroy them completely." The lead Zephyrian dreadnought opened fire with weapons that could reduce a small moon to rubble. Energy beams and missile salvos streaked toward the human outpost while Zormith watched with satisfaction. This would be over in minutes, and then they could move on to the next human target. But something went wrong immediately. The targeting systems on every Zephyrian ship began displaying error messages that made no sense to the alien crews. Weapons that had functioned perfectly for centuries suddenly couldn't lock onto their targets. Communication networks experienced interference that turned tactical coordination into chaos. Shield generators fluctuated wildly as if they were being attacked by some invisible force. Commander Chris Baker walked calmly to the station's main control center where Dr. Nina Walsh was making final adjustments to what appeared to be a routine piece of mining equipment. The device looked like nothing more than a standard asteroid processing laser, the kind of tool that every mining operation used to break up rocks and extract valuable minerals. "Nina," Chris said while watching the alien fleet struggle with their malfunctioning systems, "would you like to do the honors?" Dr. Walsh smiled and activated the mining laser with the casual ease of someone who had performed this operation thousands of times before. The beam that emerged from the station's industrial section appeared to be nothing more than a standard cutting tool, designed for working with asteroids. The energy beam struck the lead, Zephyrian dreadnought amidships, and cut completely through the massive warship as if it were made of soft clay rather than military-grade armor plating. The alien vessel split into two pieces that drifted apart, while secondary explosions lit up the darkness of space. Emergency beacons began broadcasting distress signals in the Zephyrian language. War Captain Zormith stared in shock at the destruction of his flagship's sister ship. The humans had just destroyed a dreadnought-class battlecruiser with what appeared to be a mining tool. Before he could process this information completely, the small patrol craft that had been fleeing toward the station suddenly reversed course and headed straight for his fleet. Lieutenant Sam Torres led his squadron into attack position while his pilots prepared to reveal the true nature of their supposedly primitive patrol boats, the ships that the Zephyrians had dismissed as obsolete. Civilian craft began to transform as hidden weapon systems emerged from concealed compartments, and hull modifications revealed their actual capabilities. Commander Alex Reed's vessel was the first to demonstrate the difference between appearance and reality. His patrol craft, which looked like a simple cargo hauler, suddenly bristled with energy weapons that made Zephyrian military technology look like ancient history. The beam that emerged from his ship's main gun turned a Zephyrian heavy cruiser into an expanding cloud of superheated vapor. Within minutes, the entire Zephyrian attack fleet found themselves surrounded by what they had initially dismissed as harmless civilian traffic. Cargo haulers piloted by Freight Captain Joe Martinez and Transport Supervisor Beth Collins revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous than simple merchant vessels. Their ships carried weapons that could disable alien warships without destroying them completely, leaving crews alive but helpless. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over before most of the Zephyrian crews understood what was happening. 200 warships of the mighty Empire found themselves either destroyed or completely disabled by a handful of humans who had been going about their routine business just minutes earlier. War Captain Zormith found himself staring at a communication screen showing Commander Chris Baker's calm face. The human looked like nothing more than a tired mining supervisor, certainly not like someone who had just defeated an entire battle fleet. "Captain," Chris said in a friendly tone, "welcome to Haven's Gate. I'm afraid your ships will need some repairs before you can head home." Supreme War Commander Vexthul stood frozen in his command chamber staring at the holographic display that showed the complete destruction of his attack fleet at Haven's Gate. The tactical readout indicated that 200 of the Empire's finest warships had been either destroyed or disabled in less than 15 minutes by what appeared to be a small mining station and a handful of civilian patrol craft. His advisors gathered around him in stunned silence as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "This is impossible," Subcommander Kretak whispered, while her claws scratched nervously at the metal surface of the tactical table. "Our intelligence reports described Haven's Gate as a minor outpost with primitive defenses. How could they destroy an entire battle fleet so quickly?" Intelligence Chief Mordek moved closer to the display while studying the battle recordings that had been transmitted back to the homeworld before the communication systems were destroyed. His scholarly mind tried to process information that challenged everything the Zephyrians believed about human capabilities. "Supreme Commander, the energy signatures from the human weapons are unlike anything in our database. Their technology appears to operate on principles we do not understand." Meanwhile, Admiral Jake Morrison arrived at Haven's Gate aboard the UTS Defender to personally congratulate Commander Chris Baker and his team on their successful defense of the station. The massive human warship docked with the mining outpost while Jake prepared to meet with the people who had just demonstrated humanity's true military capabilities to their alien enemies. Chris Baker waited in the station's main conference room along with Dr. Nina Walsh, Lieutenant Sam Torres, and several other key personnel who had participated in the brief battle. The mining station commander looked exactly like what he was, a hard-working frontier administrator who happened to have access to technology that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. "Commander Baker," Jake said while shaking hands with the station manager, "I have to admit I'm impressed. When we got word that the Zephyrians were sending their first attack fleet to Haven's Gate, I was prepared to come help with the cleanup. Instead, I arrived to find you've already taken care of everything. Chris smiled and gestured toward Dr. Walsh. Admiral, the credit really belongs to Nina and her team. That mining laser she's been working on turned out to be quite effective against alien armor plating. Dr. Nina Walsh looked somewhat embarrassed by the attention. The physicist had been developing improved mining equipment for civilian use, not weapons for military applications. Sir, the industrial laser array was designed for asteroid processing. I had no idea it would work so well against military targets until we actually tried it. Jake turned his attention to Lieutenant Sam Torres and the other pilots who had participated in the battle. And what about your patrol squadron? Our records show you disabled over 50 enemy ships without losing a single pilot. Sam exchanged glances with his fellow pilots before answering. Admiral, those weren't really patrol craft in the traditional sense. The civilian ships assigned to Haven's Gate all have standard defensive modifications that are pretty common on frontier colonies. We just never had reason to use them before today. This conversation was being recorded and transmitted to the captured Zephyrian officers who were being held in comfortable detention facilities aboard the station. War Captain Zormith listened with growing horror as the humans casually discussed technology that had effortlessly defeated his fleet. The realization was slowly dawning on him that humanity had spent 3,000 years advancing beyond anything the Zephyrians could imagine. Dr. Amy Foster, who had accompanied Admiral Morrison from the UTS Defender, joined the group in the conference room. The science advisor had been analyzing the wreckage of the Zephyrian ships, and her findings were deeply troubling for anyone who still believed the aliens posed a serious threat to humanity. Admiral, Dr. Foster said while consulting her datapad, I've completed the initial analysis of the alien technology. Their ships appear to be using the same basic principles they were using 3,000 years ago, when the treaty was signed. There have been some improvements in efficiency and power output, but nothing that represents a fundamental breakthrough in understanding. Jake nodded while considering the implications of this information. So while we've been advancing steadily for 3 millennia, they've essentially been standing still. That appears to be correct, Dr. Foster confirmed. Their weapons, shields, propulsion systems, and communication equipment are all variations on technology we encountered during the original treaty negotiations. Meanwhile, what they're calling our mining equipment represents advances in energy manipulation that are several orders of magnitude beyond their current capabilities. Engineer Gary Phillips joined the discussion. From his position monitoring the station's systems, the maintenance chief had been working on Haven's Gate for over a decade and understood better than anyone how routine human technology would appear to outside observers. Admiral, if I may add something to Dr. Foster's analysis, the tools and equipment we use here every day would probably seem like magic to these aliens. Gary activated a holographic display showing some of the standard equipment used throughout the mining station. Personal communication devices that could instantly contact anyone in the galaxy, medical scanners that could diagnose and treat most diseases automatically, and construction tools that could manipulate matter at the atomic level. This is all basic frontier technology that every colony takes for granted. Marine Sergeant Kelly Brooks, who was responsible for station security, stepped forward with a standard infantry weapon in her hands. The device looked like a simple energy rifle, the kind of sidearm that every security officer carried as routine equipment. Admiral, would you like me to demonstrate what our standard personal weapons can do to alien military hardware? Jake looked at the captured Zephyrian officers who were watching this demonstration through the security monitors. Their reptilian faces showed expressions of growing despair as they began to understand the true scope of human advancement. I think our guests are beginning to get the picture, Sergeant. War Captain Zormith realized that his species had made a terrible mistake in declaring war on humanity. The 3,000-year treaty hadn't been protecting the galaxy from human aggression. Instead, it had been giving humanity time to develop into something far beyond Zephyrian understanding, while the Empire remained essentially unchanged. How long? Zormith asked quietly. Have your people possessed this level of technology? Commander Baker considered the question while looking around at his colleagues. The truth was that none of them really thought of their equipment as being particularly advanced. It was simply the standard technology that humans had developed naturally over the course of 3 millennia, of peaceful progress. Captain, Chris replied honestly, most of what you've seen today represents technology that's been in common use for several hundred years. The mining laser that destroyed your flagship is actually somewhat outdated by current standards. Dr. Walsh has been working on improvements that would make it about 50 times more efficient. This information caused several of the captured aliens to make distressed sounds in their native language. The idea that humans had casually destroyed their battle fleet using obsolete equipment was almost too much for their military minds to process. Dr. Foster activated another display showing comparative technological development over the past 3,000 years. The graph clearly demonstrated that while Zephyrian advancement had remained essentially flat, human capabilities had grown exponentially. Captain, your people appear to have assumed that the treaty would remain in effect indefinitely. Our species treated it as a temporary arrangement that gave us time to prepare for whatever might come next. Jake Morrison looked at the Zephyrian prisoners with something approaching sympathy. These aliens had launched what they believed would be a devastating first strike against a weak and unprepared enemy. Instead, they had discovered that humanity had quietly become the most advanced civilization in known space. Captain Zormith, Jake said while addressing the alien officer directly, I think it's time we arranged for you to speak with your Supreme War Commander. This war can end right now if your people are willing to accept some new realities about the balance of power in this galaxy. The Zephyrian captain nodded slowly while staring at the displays, showing human technological superiority. His species had declared war on beings who possessed the power of gods. And somehow these humans were still treating their prisoners with kindness and respect, rather than simply destroying the Zephyrian Empire completely. Perhaps there was still hope for his people after all. The neutral space station where Admiral Jake Morrison met with Supreme War Commander Vexthul looked like a simple trading post floating in the empty space between human and Zephyrian territories. The structure had been built decades earlier as a place where different alien species could conduct business without political interference. But today it would serve as the location for one of the most important diplomatic meetings in galactic history. Jake arrived aboard a single transport vessel, accompanied by Captain Lisa Harper and Dr. Amy Foster, along with a small diplomatic team that included language specialists and cultural advisors. The human delegation looked remarkably casual compared to the formal military ceremony that surrounded Vexthul's arrival. The Zephyrian Supreme War Commander brought an entire escort fleet and dozens of high-ranking officials, as if he were still trying to project strength despite the complete failure of his military campaign. The meeting room was simple and functional, with a large table surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate different alien physiologies. Vexthul entered first, his elaborate ceremonial armor making him look impressive despite the desperate circumstances that had brought him to this negotiation. His advisors arranged themselves behind him, while Jake and his team took seats on the opposite side of the table. Supreme War Commander, Jake said in a respectful tone that showed no trace of mockery or triumph. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I believe we have much to discuss about the future relationship between our species. Vexthul studied the human admiral with eyes that showed both wariness and grudging respect. The complete destruction of his attack fleet had taught him that underestimating humanity was a mistake his species could not afford to make again. Admiral Morrison, I must admit that your people have demonstrated capabilities that we did not anticipate. The 3,000-year treaty appears to have created some misunderstandings about the current balance of power. Captain Lisa Harper activated a communication link that connected directly to Earth, where President Danny Crawford was waiting to participate in the negotiations from his office in the Global Assembly Building. The president's image appeared on a holographic display that allowed him to see and hear everything happening in the meeting room. Supreme War Commander, President Crawford said while leaning forward in his chair, let me be completely clear about humanity's position. We bear no ill will toward your people or any other species in this galaxy. The laughter that followed your declaration of war was not mockery, but genuine amusement at what appeared to be a serious misunderstanding of current realities. Dr. Amy Foster opened a data pad and began displaying information about human technological development over the past 3 millennia. The charts and graphs showed exponential advancement in every field from energy production to space travel to medical science. Commander Vexthul, Your species appears to value stability and tradition above rapid change. This is not a criticism, simply an observation about different approaches to cultural development. Vex Thol examined the displays with growing understanding of just how completely his intelligence services had failed to assess human capabilities. Dr. Foster, are you saying that while my people maintained our existing way of life, humanity continued to advance at an accelerating pace? That's exactly what we're saying, Jake replied while gesturing toward additional data that showed comparative development between the two species. The treaty gave us 3,000 years of peace during which we could focus on exploration, research, and technological advancement, rather than military conflict. We used that time effectively, the Zephyrian commander's advisors whispered among themselves in their native language while processing this information. Intelligence Chief Mordek looked particularly disturbed as he realized that his entire career had been based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions about human society and capabilities. President Crawford leaned back in his chair while considering the best way to present humanity's offer to the defeated aliens. Supreme War Commander, we could have responded to your declaration of war by simply destroying your homeworld and ending this conversation permanently. The fact that we're sitting here talking demonstrates that humanity prefers cooperation to conquest. What exactly are you proposing? Vexthul asked while his tail moved restlessly behind his chair. Jake activated another holographic display that showed a proposed agreement between the two species. The document outlined a new relationship, based on mutual benefit rather than the old treaty's focus on maintaining separation between human and Zephyrian territories. We're offering your people a choice, Commander. You can continue this pointless war and face inevitable defeat, or you can accept a partnership that will benefit both our species. Dr. Foster expanded the display to show specific areas where Zephyrian and human societies could work together. Your people have maintained cultural traditions and social structures that we find valuable and interesting. In exchange for sharing some of our technological advances, we would like to learn from your experiences in governance and social organization. The proposal included plans for joint exploration missions, shared research projects, and cultural exchange programs that would allow both species to benefit from their different approaches to civilization. Colonial Administrator Frank Miller, participating through a communication link from his office on New Montana, explained how human colonies could provide technical assistance to Zephyrian settlements while learning from alien methods of resource management. Trade Representative Janet Stone presented economic projections showing how cooperation between the two species could create prosperity that neither could achieve alone. Human manufacturing capabilities combined with Zephyrian resource extraction techniques could produce goods and services that would improve life for billions of beings across the galaxy. Vexthul listened to these proposals while struggling to accept that his species' survival depended on the mercy of beings they had tried to destroy just days earlier. The humans were offering genuine partnership rather than demanding surrender and subjugation, which was more generous than any defeated enemy had a right to expect. And if we refuse this offer? Vexthul asked quietly. Jake's expression remained friendly, but his voice carried undertones that suggested humanity's patience was not unlimited. Then you can return to your homeworld and continue preparing for a war that you cannot possibly win. We'll defend ourselves when attacked, but we won't pursue your forces back to Zephyrian territory unless you force us to do so. President Crawford added his own perspective from Earth. Commander, we're not interested in ruling over other species or conquering alien worlds. We have more than enough challenges managing our own expanding civilization. But if you insist on viewing us as enemies, we'll respond appropriately to protect our people and our allies. The negotiations continued for several hours as both sides worked out the details of what would become known as the Haven's Gate Accords. The new agreement formally ended the 3,000-year-old treaty while establishing a framework for cooperation between humans and Zephyrians that could serve as a model for relationships with other alien species. Vexthul finally signed the accords while acknowledging that his species had made a terrible mistake in declaring war on humanity. The Supreme War Commander returned to his homeworld carrying news that the Zephyrian Empire would survive, but only as a junior partner in a galaxy where humans had quietly become the dominant civilization. 6 months later, Commander Chris Baker stood on the observation deck of Haven's Gate, watching the first joint human-Zephyrian patrol vessels beginning their cooperative missions. The mining station had been expanded to serve as a diplomatic and trading center where multiple alien species could meet with human representatives to discuss new relationships based on current realities rather than outdated assumptions. Dr. Nina Walsh continued her work on improved mining technology, though her research now included applications that could benefit Zephyrian colonies as well as human settlements. Lieutenant Sam Torres commanded a mixed squadron of human and alien pilots who were learning to work together despite their very different backgrounds and capabilities. In the station's newly constructed diplomatic quarters, young human children played with Zephyrian younglings, while their parents attended meetings about trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. 8-year-old Emma Parker, whose parents worked in the station's administration section, had become friends with a young Zephyrian named Kesselin, whose family served in the new Joint Diplomatic Corps. The war that was supposed to destroy humanity had instead revealed them as the galaxy's unexpected protectors and guides. The laughter that had greeted the Zephyrian declaration of war had not been mockery, but the amusement of a species that had grown far beyond the need for conquest and destruction. Humanity had spent 3,000 years becoming something greater than their former enemies could imagine, and now they were offering to share that greatness with anyone wise enough to accept it.